All righty. Good morning, everybody. Once again, we're going to get right into it. So welcome to the Hurley Investments Trade Findings and Adjustments of June 29th. Morning, Jim, Jeff, Dave. Few names I don't see typically. Everyone else, welcome to the webinar. All right. Well, what do we have today? Update for our market. Let's just do a little update. Can't change that much. We have most of our stocks up, but we have one real doozy. We'll get to that in a second. What did we talk about last time on June 22nd? We talked about getting puts on various stocks, and I think I didn't mention Under Armour 750 puts. If I didn't mention it that time, which it doesn't look like I did, I should have. Nice to have those on, although it's up nicely today. Boeing. Sharp turn down like it usually has, just hits a point and then drops and then goes up really quick. Very jagged, very volatile. The thought was we're breaking this 215, needed to get protection on. That looked great. As it came down to 205, even to 202 intraday, hit a pivot point, started to come back up the beginning of this week. As soon as it had up above that, back above the 50-day, Boeing 210 puts came back off for a nice little profit. I'll say 210 puts taken back off as it was bouncing back above the 50-day. That still looks like a smart move, and Boeing has just been one where you've got to keep an eye on when it hits its top. Usually it's been around that 215, so this day when it broke above it was a positive day to see it keep going. Maybe could have looked at protection up at 222, but really there's nothing that would tell us that it's needing to that has a ceiling there and that we could finally be breaking above this 215 ceiling it's been struggling with for months now. Then we got the news of the one of the supplier companies going on strike, and it fell pretty sharply from that news. And, you know, from a volatile swing down and back up, we've profited a little bit, which is what we want to see. Still have 90 puts on Disney. We'll get back to Baidu because that's what I want to talk about today. Bank of America looked great. Excuse me. You'll hear me sniffle and snort today. I apologize. Just the summer allergies that I typically have to deal with. Once Bank of America dropped below this little support they were building, once they got down to breaking that 50-day, I got the 2850 puts on. Came down, hit that pivot point, And today it's looking great. Hit the pivot point up here at the 29. Couldn't get over that. So we'll look at that one at the end of the day to decide if we stick with our 2850 puts. What's been happening with the banks is they've been going through their stress tests last week, which was probably why it was falling down a bit. All the major banks passed those stress tests that they're obligated to do for regulatory reasons. So now all of the banks are headed up after passing those well. Under Armour, I think, is just being Under Armour, and it's not even as up as much as it was earlier. So definitely nice to have the 750s. So I think we can take those guys off. Ford was one. Let me talk about Ford. Maybe that's one I didn't mention as well last week, but Ford got protection on back at 14, as it just looked like it was starting to cool off, and 1450 looks like a new top, but then it popped right back up this week and we got protection back off as we got through a weekend that we wanted that protection on, and it's popped back up to, not back up, but popped above that 1450, still heading up really quickly, and glad we had the protection on for what we needed and got it off for a small loss, heading up nicely, and we'll try not to give away all of our profits as it kind of swings up and down, higher highs and higher lows. But the main event, let me fill in what I was going to say here. Ford at 14, but taken last week back off as it held up and is heading up higher. Freaking Baidu. Last week got protection on at 141. And this week popped up really nicely at the beginning of the week, looking like it held that 140 number. Even yesterday kind of came down, touched it. Nothing of much concern to decide of yesterday. And of course today it's just falling. So what is the deal with Baidu? I'll let that question linger a bit. We got 141 puts back off as soon as it was bouncing on that 140 line, coming back up on Monday. And of course that looks like, really stupid. Kicking ourselves in the butt. Let's see. Monday the 26th. Monday the 26th. Everything's starting to come back for the market. Held a pivot point. starting to head back up. So it just seemed like the way our market was going, it made sense to get some protection off of some things. Obviously, that was a good decision for Boeing and Ford. Not so good for Baidu. If you have an account that still hasn't come over from the transfer, speaking to you clients, you still have 141 or 140 puts, I can't remember, whatever we were able to get on. So you're still protected. You have nothing to worry about. Last week, this week, took them off Monday as it was bouncing huge. I don't know if I want to say huge for Baidu because it does this stuff all the time. Nicely off of 140. Boy, do I wish we had kept those on. All right. So let's go through this. Let's talk about Baidu. Does anyone know why Baidu is taking a dump today? It's all right if you guess. What news do we have? What reason do we have that Baidu's just falling? Dave said negative China news. I couldn't see anything, Dave. Do you have something that I don't know about? Because all I've seen is how Chinese companies are going full bore on getting their artificial intelligence stuff going to compete with Chat GPT. And all I've read is that Baidu is going to be the biggest player there for AI, which of course would be a reason that it would be heading up, not a reason for it to head down. AI is the buzzword of the market right now. Who's doing AI? Meta, Google. How are they going to use it and profit from it? It's the EV of a couple years ago, electric vehicles, where if you had a car company up and decide, yep, we're doing EVs, they're just shot up like no tomorrow on basically that news. And now it's AI. And said China is overall suffering in economy performance per Bloomberg, the same. But that's been known for some time that I mean, obviously they're suffering from the shutdowns and pandemic, but even after they've opened, their opening has been less than impressive for economic numbers wise. But we've known that's been kind of an ongoing thing for like a year now. It might be why overall Baidu's not just taking off to like 300 anytime soon, but it's not necessarily a news day event that is a surprise to anybody, if that makes sense. So I'll tell you what I think. Thanks for the comments, thoughts. Definitely could be all of that stuff to some degree or another. I think a fund is dumping Baidu right now. Getting rid of it for whatever reason. Maybe they're selling this AI news. I really don't know. But at least I don't know why. I'm pretty positive with how much the volume is at this point in the day. Obviously, excuse me, the volume will be a big factor in whether or not it's a big institutional selling. But at the same time, if it's just one firm dumping Baidu, it's not gonna, our volume isn't gonna be up here like we have on these days. And of course, it could have been spread across this whole last couple of weeks. 150 was their target, and they just kind of start dumping. Everybody else kind of wants to start buying, and then another big dump, and we get a big down day. That's my thought. Simply because there's just no other rhyme or reason. It just seems to be what the best explanation is. So the next question is, what do we do now? I'm gonna let you guys comment here, of course, and I'll tell you what I think, but let's use our brains for a moment and let's put you in the decision chair. You wake up this morning and Baidu is dumping, it's down over 5%. What do? You get protection on immediately. Might have been a good choice this morning, but pretty much every other morning of the last several weeks and just in general, Baidu seems to bounce back up. So my decision was to wait the first hour. We've waited the first hour, and it did get down to that pivot point, 133-ish. Let's see, it's 132.98, so almost right on 133. But I really would have thought 135 would have been the more realistic and just a more real support level. As Kevin and I were talking, I mentioned, it's holding that pivot point, and he kindly reminded me pivot points are not support and resistance, they're just short-term 30-day herd mentality points. Don't mean quite as much. To which I said, I agree, but for Baidu today, and from what I see earlier in the month, it is a support level, at least for the short term. To which Kevin said, that's true, but we're trying to find longer term support and resistance levels. So just a little window into our back and forth. I mean, you couldn't be more on the dot for where Baidu traded to hold that pivot point. All right, Dave, maybe get protection on now in case it gets down to the 50-day. Okay. Dave's thought, what's the next stopping point? 129 down there at the 50-day. Dave, good suggestion. I like where your head's at. I definitely went through those thoughts myself. Anyone else want to throw in their 2 cents? So we took puts off, 141 puts off for a little loss. So it bounced up to off of 140 up to 143 in one day. So we lost coming, and now we're losing going. So if we get protection back on, are we just getting swung out of good decisions? We're getting swung out of profits, and then it bounces tomorrow from a one-day sell-off. And we just keep getting swung around and swung out of a profit. So here's my thought. I can't, Dave, I can't justify adding protection right now. One, because it is kind of holding that 134. It's bouncing off of that pivot point, but also because it is lunchtime East Coast, and if we get any more buying towards the end of the day, I don't want to get puts on now for it to then come back up later in the day. So my decision is if we come back up and hold that 135, I think we've got some buying power to hold up our stock, and I think I'd leave it for another day. I reserve the right to change my mind, obviously. Because obviously it can go either way. And 135, it might not be as important as thought, but we can have that decision and that conversation later. But right now, holding off adding protection in the East Coast lunch hour. Oh my goodness. Lunch hours toward, if we get a bounce toward the end of the day, we make our decision on protecting. If we don't get a bounce, that might be our decision to add protection back on. Like Dave suggested, it gets down to the 50-day. Very nearly bearish crossover here on the RSI, crossover on our MACD, but not quite on our 5 and 20-day exponential moving averages, which tells us kind of where the trend is. Nearer term weekly trends are going, monthly trends. Typically, once it crosses that line, we get another drop down. So let's see, cross this line on this day at 121, 122-ish, came down another couple dollars to 118 before heading back up. Another one dropped significantly down to 132, then bounced, even had a day that came and opened at 126 and bounced up. So those aren't necessarily giving me any confidence on what to do, because the likelihood is that it's probably just going to bounce once again. Especially as we're really not moving from anything concrete. Just a stupid fund deciding stupidly to sell a stock that's doing just fine. All right, so maybe I sound like I haven't made my mind up, and that's because I haven't made my mind up. But right now, I want the day to see what happens. I want the day to observe the stock and see where it goes. And if really nothing much happens, stays around 134, maybe time to add protection back on. comes up a bit, that gives me a little more confidence that, hey, maybe we're going to get a bounce tomorrow. And that's really the best I can do for the day, just reading what's going on, trying to make the best decision with the information we have, because we don't have much to go on. Usually it's any bad day is awful, but down day is awful, but it's a little less awful when we have a reason or news that it's down, reason why, the news that tells us why it's down. We're really not getting that today, so that makes it even trickier. So my thought, let's take the data, observe what's going on, see how it moves, see how it holds up, make that decision at the end of the day the best we can. Any other thoughts or questions? This is why we have several different stocks to help us out, several different positions that if one takes a crap like Baidu did today, we still have Apple going up, we still have Meta was down, but pretty much break even today, but it's still holding up nicely. Disney had a bit of a bounce, but it's still kind of figuring out where it wants to go. Ford, nice bounce above hit 15. That might be something to make a decision on, but right now, kind of want to let that see where it goes. We have our banks that are looking great today. Especially JP Morgan. Boeing looking great today. So at least we have a few things offsetting. So my takeaway is good thing we have our eggs in more than one basket. My other thought is one day never makes a trend. I'll say doesn't. Make sure let's say one day should never make or break your portfolio. And time usually takes care. Or I could say a portfolio usually takes care over time, but either way. Meaning we've got one stock that really sucks today. Over time, this 1 day drop is less important than where things go over a longer period, because this kind of stuff happens all the time. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? Things you wanted me to look at, go over today? All right, guys. I'm not seeing anything. So that's it for you guys. That's it for me. Coming up, we've got a wonderful 4 day weekend. Last day of the month tomorrow. We've got July 3rd on Monday and July 4th, Independence Day, on Tuesday next week. And our market is closed Monday and Tuesday. So nice 4 day weekend. I'm thinking, and this might, as I'm thinking this out loud, be our reason to be protecting some things like Baidu that we're worried about. Typically, big money gets out of the market, nothing really holding us up or giving us any reason or sense on that Friday before, as it's the last day of the month. Usually some expiring options, some selling, just some weird retail stuff happening as big money is checked out, going on vacation. So, some reason to ignore some of the movements tomorrow, some reason to maybe have some things protected today before we get into that period. Maybe some reasons to have some covered calls on a few things. Got covered calls on Google shares up at 125, I think. I want to say 125 or 130, whatever it is. Visa 130. And of course, we're having a huge bounce today, so we'll probably get called away from Visa. Excuse me, 230 covered calls on Visa. But we got such a nice credit for 1 week out to the July 7th next week to expire. kind of seemed brilliant yesterday. Of course, not so much today, but we'll have some nice profit there. Easy to roll those out as well. If it doesn't come back down, we could roll those back up to 235 out in time. But you can kind of see where my head's at and why for Visa covered calls are the thing. It's just not getting above 235. All right, guys, that does it for me. Have a good one. Talk to you next time. Actually, speaking of next time, just some scheduling stuff. Next week, we are not doing a trade findings and adjustments or a Monday market commentary. Obviously, we've got our holiday weekend, or I guess holiday beginning of the week, long weekend. This is our small summer break. We're not doing any webinars next week, but the following week we're back to normal, which is the 10th. For Monday the 10th, Kevin will be back, and for Thursday the 13th, I'll be back. So almost forgot to mention that. You guys have a good weekend, a nice Independence Day. Enjoy grilling with your families, hanging out, not worrying about all this stuff. And we'll talk to you in a week. I guess I should say 2 weeks. Take care, guys.